Everybody thinks the first year is the worst one. It isn't. The first year is the loudest, and it's the one everybody's watching, and it very nearly killed me, but it wasn't the hardest. The third year was, and there are 5 reasons for that, and the fourth is the one nobody warns you about at all, because it's the one you'd never guess. My name is Walter. I'm 82 years old, and I've lived alone in this house in Maine since I lost my wife, Helen, 7 years ago. Maybe you're in the first year right now and everyone's been very kind, and you can't imagine anything worse than this. Or maybe you're further along than that, and something's gone wrong that you can't explain and can't tell anybody about, because on paper you should be doing better than you are. So here's what nobody told me. 5 things about the third year. And stay with me to the fourth, because that's the one I'd have given a great deal to have known was coming. The first one. By the third year, everybody has stopped. Not stopped caring. I want to be careful with that, because it would be easy to make this bitter, and it isn't, and they don't deserve it. But in the first year the world shows up, it genuinely does. There were people in this house for a week after the funeral. There was food on that counter I hadn't cooked. The phone rang constantly, and the church sent people, and men I hadn't spoken to in 15 years, came and stood in this kitchen not knowing what to say, and said it anyway. That's the first year. You're carried. You're a man in a wheelbarrow being pushed by about 40 people. Second year, it thins. That's natural, and I'd have done the same. By the third year, it's gone. Completely. Nobody is checking on you in the third year, because in everybody else's head, the event was 3 years ago, and events end. That's the arithmetic that catches you. Grief runs on a calendar in other people's heads, and it is not the same calendar as yours. And by year 3, theirs has run out, and yours has not. And I'd say this to anybody with a widowed friend or a widowed father, because it costs nothing and it matters more than you'd think. Put a mark in your calendar for the third year. Everybody remembers the funeral. A good many remember the first anniversary. Almost nobody remembers the third, and the third is when he's on his own with it. Ring him up in that 3rd October and say you were thinking about her. That's the entire job. It's been done for me exactly once, and I have not forgotten it, and I never will. If you're walking this road alone, subscribe to this channel so you don't have to walk it alone. All right, number 2. The second one, and this is the worst half of it, by the third year, you've stopped too. I don't mean you've stopped grieving, I mean you've stopped giving yourself permission to. Here's what happened in my head, and I've since found out it happens in nearly everybody's. In the first year, there's an explanation for everything. You have a bad Tuesday. Well, your wife died in October. You can't be bothered to cook. Your wife died. You sit in a chair for 4 hours and get nothing done and can't say where the afternoon went. Your wife died. The explanation covers everything, and it is a complete and honest explanation, and nobody, including you, expects anything else. The explanation has a shelf life. Nobody tells you what it is. There's no letter that arrives. But somewhere in the third year, I caught myself doing something new. I'd have a bad day, and instead of the explanation, I get a different sentence entirely. It's been 3 years, Walter. That's it. That's the whole sentence, and I said it to myself a great many times in that year, and it is the cruelest thing anybody said to me in the whole business. And the man who said it was me, because now the bad Tuesday has no cover. Now it isn't grief, it's just a man failing to manage. Now the 4 hours in the chair isn't mourning, it's laziness, or something worse that you don't want to name. Now the not cooking isn't loss, it's a man letting himself go. Same Tuesday, same chair, same empty kitchen. Entirely different verdict on it, delivered by me on the basis of a calendar. And that's the more dangerous half. External support you can go and ask for. It's a hard ask, and men my age are bad at it, but the mechanism exists. There's no phone for the other one. When the person withdrawing permission from you is you, there's nobody to call about it, and you can't see it happening, because it doesn't arrive as a thought. It arrives as a feeling of falling short. I spent most of a year feeling like a man failing at something without once being able to say what. What broke it was my daughter Susan. She's a nurse in Boston and she notices things over a telephone that most people wouldn't notice standing in the room. She said on a Thursday in about the third winter, "Pop, you talk about Mom like you're embarrassed about it." And I said something dismissive because that's what I do. And she let it go because she's clever about that. But I sat with it afterward and she was exactly right. I had started apologizing for my own wife. 3 years on, if her name came up, I'd say something and then add something else after it to show I was all right. I'd bring her up and then immediately let everybody off the hook about it. Nobody asked me to do that. Not one person. I'd taken the job on myself, and I'd been doing it for months. Now, that sentence didn't come from nowhere, and it wasn't mine originally. It comes from a general idea floating about in the air that grief is a thing you get over, that it has a duration, and if you go past it, there's something the matter with you. I don't know where anybody got that. It doesn't match anything I've observed in 82 years. What I'd say instead, and this is only a carpenter's opinion, and if it's more than sadness for you, if it isn't lifting at all and hasn't for a long stretch, that's a matter for a doctor, and I'd not have anybody hear me say otherwise, is that it doesn't end. It changes shape. The grief I have now at 7 years is not smaller than the grief I had at 1 year. It's a different object entirely. At 1 year, it was the whole weather. Now it's a thing I carry that has a weight and a shape I know exactly, that I can put down for hours at a time and pick up again. That is heavier in February and lighter in June. That's not recovery. Nothing recovered. I'm carrying something I wasn't carrying in 2017 and I'll carry it out of here. But a thing you can carry is a very different proposition from whether you're standing in. And the mistake of the third year, mine anyway, was measuring myself against getting over it, which was never on offer, instead of against carrying it, which I was actually managing rather well by then, and giving myself no credit for whatever. If you're in the third year and you feel like you're failing, check what you're measuring against. If it's over it, you're going to fail that test every day for the rest of your life. And it's not a fair test, and nobody sane has ever passed it. Before the next one, tell me in the comments which year you're in, just the number. 1st, 3rd, 12th. I'd like to see them, and I think it would do a lot of people good to see how many of us are out here at every stage. I read every single one, and I answer as many as these old hands allow. And if this is helping you, that thumbs up tells YouTube to show it to somebody else sitting alone tonight. Number 3, the third one. By the third year, the firsts are finished, and it turns out the firsts were holding you up. This one took me a long time to understand, and I think it's the piece that explains most of the rest. Everybody warns you about the firsts. The first Christmas, the first birthday, the first anniversary. The first time the lupines come up in June in the bed she planted and she isn't there to be pleased about them. And they're right to warn you. Those are terrible. Helen died in October of 2017, and the first Christmas was 10 weeks later, and I would not choose to do that again. But here's what nobody says about the firsts, and it's the thing I'd most want somebody in year 1 to know. The firsts have a shape. Every one of them is an event. It has a date on it. You can see it coming from a fortnight out, and you can brace for it, and you can get through it, and then it's over and you've done it. Your children call you on those days. People remember. There's a reason to feel dreadful, and everybody agrees on the reason. And when it's done, you have got somewhere. You've done the first Christmas. Whatever else is true, that's behind you now. I got through the first 2 years on that, more than I understood at the time. There was always a next one to brace for. The whole of that period had a structure to it, a series of hard-dated things, arriving in order, each one survivable, and each one a milestone. Then you finish them. And what's on the other side of the last first is a thing I was not prepared for at all. There's nothing to brace for anymore. There's no next event. There's no date circled. What there is instead is Tuesday, and then another Tuesday, and a very great number of Tuesdays after that, arriving at a rate of about 7 a week for as long as it goes on. The horizon changes. That's the best way I can put it. For 2 years, the horizon was the next hard date. In the third year, the horizon becomes This is the arrangement now, and that's a different animal entirely. You cannot brace against Tuesday. There's nothing to get through. It isn't an event, it's a condition, and it doesn't end and there's no milestone on the other side of it. I remember when it landed. It wasn't a hard day, which is part of the point. It was an ordinary afternoon in the 3rd February, and I was in the shop doing something and not thinking about anything much. And I stopped and I thought, this is it now. Not as a crisis, just as a piece of information arriving late. That the arrangement I'd been treating as a difficult passage, something I was getting through on the way back to something, was not a passage. It was the shape of the remainder. I stood there a while over that, and there's a second half to this that's worth naming, because it explains something that confused me for months. The first give you a job. That's what I hadn't understood. For 2 years I had a role. The role was, get through the next hard thing. It's a miserable role, but it is a role, and it has tasks in it, and at the end of every one of them, somebody says, well done, and you can feel that you've accomplished something. Year 3, no job. Nobody needs anything from you. There's nothing to get through. And a man who spent 2 years with a clear, if terrible assignment suddenly has none at all. And the not having one is a specific kind of awful that I'd not experienced since I retired. Which is the other thing about year 3, and it lands on a certain kind of man particularly hard. I'd been a carpenter for 45 years. Before that, I was the oldest of 4 with a dead father and a family to help hold together from the age of 23. There has not been one period of my adult life where something wasn't requiring me. Then Helen died, and for 2 years the requirement was to survive it, and that was enough to organize a life around. And then that requirement expired too. 3rd year I had no job of any description. Not work, not a wife to look after, not a hard date to brace for. 80 acres of Tuesday in every direction, for as long as it went on. That's what I mean when I say the horizon changed. It isn't only that the dates ran out, it's that when the dates ran out, so did the last thing that was asking anything of me. And I want to say to anybody in year 1 who's dreading the calendar, those dates are hard, and they'll be hard, and I won't pretend otherwise, but they're also carrying you, and you'll only find out they were carrying you when you run out of them. So here's the practical version, and it's the only useful thing I can hand somebody in year 2. Start building the next thing before the firsts run out. Don't wait until the calendar's empty to look for something that requires you. Because the day the last first is finished, you want something already in progress. A project, a person you're looking after, a thing you're learning, anything at all that will still be asking for you on the Wednesday after the last anniversary. I had nothing in progress on that day. That's the mistake, and it cost me the better part of a year, and it's entirely avoidable if somebody tells you it's coming. Somebody's telling you now. And I want to say something about the 2nd anniversaries because they're part of this, and they're strange in a way nobody prepares you for either. The 2nd Christmas is not the 1st Christmas. Everybody knows the first one is going to be dreadful, and everybody behaves accordingly. My children were both here. There were phone calls. Somebody checked on me on Christmas Eve. The 2nd Christmas, I was on my own, not through anybody's fault. David had his wife's family that year, and Susan was working, which happens to nurses at Christmas, and both of them asked, and both of them would have changed it if I'd said a word. I said I was fine. I was managing well by then, and I meant it when I said it in November. The 2nd Christmas was harder than the 1st, considerably, and it took me until about the 3rd year to work out why. And the answer is the same answer as everything else in this talk. The first one had scaffolding on it. Everybody knew, everybody showed up, there was an event to get through, and 40 people prepared to help me get through it. The second one, everybody assumed, reasonably, that the worst was behind us. Same day, same empty chair at the table. One of them had a structure around it, and one of them didn't. So the pattern starts earlier than year 3 if you're watching for it. Year 2 is where the support drops off and the dates are still coming. Year 3 is where the support is gone and the dates have stopped as well, and that's the bottom of it. Which gives me the one bit of advice I'd hand to a person in year 2, and it's a small practical thing that I did not do and wish I had. Tell people what you'll want in advance while you're all right. In November of the second year, I was fine, and I said so, and I meant it, and that's how I came to be in this house alone on the second Christmas. If I'd said in October, look, I know I sound all right, and in November I will be all right, but I would like somebody here on the 25th, I'd have had somebody. Both of them would have come. Neither of them knew because I told them I was fine, because when I told them I was. You are not a good judge in November of how you'll be on Christmas Day. Nobody is. So don't decide it in November. Ask for what you want on the worst version of the day, and if it turns out you didn't need it, you've lost nothing at all except a day with your children in the house. And there's a smaller version of the same thing that catches people all year round, which is the invitation you decline in advance. Somebody asks you in September about Thanksgiving, and you're doing all right in September, and you say, don't worry about me. And what you've actually done is make a decision on behalf of a man in November who is not the man deciding. I did that repeatedly for about 2 years, and it is one of the more foolish patterns I've had. The version of me who fields the question is nearly always in better shape than the version who has to live with the answer. Because people tend to ask when things are calm and the hard days come later. So the rule I use now, and it's saved me a good deal, I don't decline anything in advance. If somebody asks about something a month out, I say yes, and I keep the option to be tired on the day. A yes can be walked back with a phone call. A no is generally permanent because people don't ask twice. That one sentence, don't worry about me, has cost more widowed men more company than any other 5 words in the language. It sounds like consideration. It's very often just a man in a good week making arrangements for a man in a bad one. We're coming up on number 4 now. The one I'd have given a great deal to know was coming. The 4th one, by the 3rd year, you start to lose them, not the memory of them. That's not what I mean, and it's why nobody warns you. Because when people say you'll never forget her, they're telling the truth, and it isn't the truth that matters. I mean the details, the specifics, the small resolution of a person. I'll tell you exactly how I found out. It was a Wednesday in the shop, 3rd year, sometime in the winter. I was fitting something and I made a mistake. Nothing serious. I'd cut a rabbit on the wrong side of a piece. And I said something under my breath. And it came to me that Helen had a particular thing she said when I did that. 54 years, she said it 1,000 times. It was one of about a dozen phrases that were entirely hers. And I could remember the words, but I couldn't hear it. I stood at that bench and tried to get it back. The actual sound of it. The way her voice went up at the end. The particular dry amusement she put on it. And it would not come. I had the words, and I had the meaning, and the sound of it was gone. I want you to understand what that's like, because I'd not been warned and it took the legs out from under me. For 2 years, she had been immediately available. That's the thing about the early grief that nobody tells you is a mercy. She was right there. I could hear her without trying. I could see the exact way she held a coffee cup with both hands, even in July. She was so present in that first year that the presence was itself part of the pain. And then somewhere in the 3rd year, quietly, without any announcement, that started to thin. And you can't stop it. That's the part. You cannot hold a voice by trying to hold it. It goes the way water goes out of your hands, and the harder you grip, the faster it goes. And here's the cruelty of it, and this is the bit that I think is the single hardest thing about the 3rd year. It feels like a betrayal. It feels like something you're doing to her. Like a failure of loyalty. As though a better man, a man who'd loved her properly, would have kept it all. And the fact that you can't hear her anymore is evidence about your character. That's not true, and I know it isn't. And it's what it feels like anyway. At 2 a.m, in the 3rd winter, alone in a house you built. Now, what I did about it, for whatever it's worth. I started writing them down. Not a journal. I tried that and it wasn't for me. Just the things she said. There's a hard-bound notebook in the drawer of the desk in the front room, and I started it in that third winter. And every time one of her phrases came to me, I wrote it down before it went again. Just the phrases. What she said when I got mud on the kitchen floor. What she said about her sister's husband, which I won't repeat. What she said every single year without fail about the first snow. What she called that green cup. The things she said when one of the children was being unreasonable, which David now says to his own daughter and has no idea he's quoting his mother. 60-some entries now. Took me 4 years to collect them, and I add maybe 2 a year at this point. And I'll tell you what it does. Because it isn't what I expected. It doesn't bring the voice back. I want to be honest about that. I still can't hear her the way I could in 2018, and I don't expect to again. But it stops the loss. That's the thing. Those 60 phrases are not going anywhere now. They're in ink, in a drawer, in a house, and when I'm gone, Lily will have them, and they'll outlast me by a long way. And there's something else, which I didn't anticipate at all. Reading them back, I get a better Helen than my memory gives me. My memory has been sanding her down for 7 years. That's what memory does with the dead. It rounds them off, makes them kinder and vaguer and less specific, turns a woman into a feeling. The Notebook doesn't do that. The Notebook has got her being sharp and unfair once or twice, and funny in a way I'd forgotten she was funny. She's more herself in that book than she is in my head, and that's the strangest and best thing that came out of the worst part of the third year. So if you're where I was, if you've caught yourself unable to hear them and it's frightened you, get a notebook. Today, ideally, write down every phrase you can still get. You'll get fewer than you think. That's the hard part. I sat down that first evening expecting to fill pages, and I got 11, and I sat there afterward feeling like a man who'd been robbed. But 11 is 11, and another one came to me a fortnight later, standing at the sink, out of nowhere. And I put down what I was holding and went and wrote it in the book before it could go again. That's how the other 50 arrived. One at a time, over 4 years, ambushing me. There's something else I'd say about the losing, because I've made it sound like nothing but a horror, and there's another side that took me years to find. What actually goes is the surface, the voice, the exact face, the specific way she held a cup. Those are the details, and they're precious, and they do fade, and I'd give a great deal to have them back. What doesn't go is deeper, and I hadn't known it was in there. I still know what she'd think. That's the plainest way I can put it. Something happens. My son does something with his daughter, or a thing comes on the radio, or one of the grandchildren makes a decision I've got doubts about. And I know Helen's position on it, immediately and completely. Not because I'm imagining her, because 54 years put a whole second judgment inside me, and it's still running. She'd have been on Lily's side about university and against me, and she'd have been right. She'd have thought the way I've arranged this living room is an improvement, and she'd never have admitted it. She'd think I ought to have called Marie back sooner than I did last month. None of that is memory. That's something else. Something that got built into me over half a century and doesn't depend on being able to recall the sound of her voice. So the surface goes and the structure stays. That's the best account I can give of it at 7 years. And I'll tell you the thing that I found hardest to accept and have now made my peace with. I'm going to lose more of it. That's simply true. At 82, my memory is not what it was for anything, let alone for a woman who's been gone 7 years. And there will be more Wednesdays in that shop where I reach for something and it isn't there. For a long time, I fought that. Went over things deliberately at night to keep them polished. Ran through the day we were married, the day David was born, the hospital in Bangor, over and over, like a man checking a stock of something. It doesn't work. Worse than that, it wears them out. A memory you take out every night stops being a memory and becomes a story about a memory. And you can feel it happening, and eventually you're not remembering the day at all. You're remembering the last time you remembered it. So I stopped. I let them alone now. I don't go looking for her. And what happens instead is that she comes on her own. Unpredictably, usually while my hands are busy, and when she comes that way, she's sharper than anything I ever got by digging for her. A smell in the shop, and she's 26. That's worth more than an hour of deliberate remembering, and it costs nothing, and it can't be forced. That's the last thing I know about the losing. Don't guard it. Write down what you can, in ink, and then leave the rest of it alone, and let her come when she comes. The fifth one. By the third year, everything you put off comes due. In the first year, everybody tells you the same thing, and it's good advice, and I'd give it myself. Don't make any big decisions. Not for a year. Don't sell the house. Don't move. Don't do anything you can't undo. So you defer. Everything. And it's correct, and it works, and it gets you through. Nobody mentions that deferral is not cancellation. By the third year, the pile is considerable, and it's sitting in the middle of your life, and it's stopped being possible to walk around. Her clothes were still in that wardrobe in the third year. Every one of them, 3 years, hanging there. And the first year that was grief, and the second year it was inertia. And by the third year, it had become a thing I was actively not doing every single day, which is different and heavier. The paperwork. Her name was still on things 3 years on. Every one of those is a small errand, and each one requires you to say the sentence, "My wife died," to a stranger on a telephone. And there were about 9 of them left, and I'd been not doing them for a long while. And the big one, sitting underneath all of it, what am I going to do now? Not this month, with the rest of it. There was a man of 79 in this house with no wife and no work and a good many years likely left. And I had genuinely not asked myself the question once, because for 2 years there'd been no need. I was getting through, and getting through was a full-time occupation. By year 3, getting through had stopped being enough to fill a life. And the question arrived, and I had no answer for it, and it sat on me for months. Now, I'll tell you how the wardrobe actually got done, because I think the mechanism matters more than the fact of it. I did not do it. I want to be plain about that. 3 years I'd been not doing it, and there is no version of events where I got up one morning and did it on my own. Susan came up for a weekend in the spring of the third year, and she didn't announce anything or make a project of it. She came up on the Friday, and on the Saturday morning she was in that room, and she said, "Do you want to do this with me?" And I said yes, and I hadn't known I was going to. It took most of a day. She took some things because she wanted them and because a daughter ought to have her mother's things. Most of the rest went to the church, which could use it, and I kept perhaps 6 items deliberately, chosen rather than defaulted to, and they're in the cedar chest at the foot of that bed. That last part is the whole difference, and it took me a while to see it. Kept is not the same as left. A thing you've chosen to keep is an act of the living. A wardrobe full of clothes you can't face is a room where something stopped. But the mechanism is what I'd want somebody to hear. 3 years I couldn't. Then somebody stood in the room and offered to do it with me, and I could immediately, without any struggle at all. Some of the deferred things cannot be done alone. That's not weakness, and it isn't a character defect, and I spent 3 years treating it as one. A man ought to be able to open his own wardrobe, I'd tell myself, and then not open it, and then think less of myself for another week. So if there's a pile in your third year, and there will be, don't do what I did and wait to become the sort of man who can face it alone. Ask somebody to be in the room. That's all it takes. Not to do it for you. Just to be in the room while you do it. I'd have got there years earlier if I'd asked. I never once considered asking, because it didn't occur to me that a thing I couldn't do alone was a thing I might do at all. That's the 5th thing. Year 1 is triage. Year 3 is when you find out that triage was never a plan and you haven't got one. Now, the honest part, and then I'll tell you what got me out. I want to say plainly that the third year was the closest I came to going under. Not in the first winter, when everybody expected it and everybody was watching. In the third, when the wheelbarrow was gone and the permission was gone and the calendar was empty and I'd started losing her voice and there was a wardrobe upstairs I couldn't open. Nobody knew. That's the part I most want to say. Not one person in my life knew how bad that year was, because I was 3 years out and doing fine as far as anybody could tell, and I answered the phone pleasantly every time it rang. If somebody had asked me that February, I'd have said I was managing. I'd have meant it. That's how it takes people. Not dramatically. A man 3 years in who answers the phone politely and has stopped starting anything, and everybody around him thinks he's out the other side and he thinks it too, and the whole thing goes on quietly for a very long time. I had a friend named Frank, lost his wife about 4 years before I lost Helen, and I've worked out since, going back over it, that Frank was in the 3rd year when he stopped answering things. Nobody thought much of it at the time. He was 3 years out. He was fine. He died at 76 with nobody close enough to have noticed how it went. So here's what I'd say to anybody in the 3rd year, and it's the only actual instruction in this whole talk. Tell somebody it's still hard. That's it. That's the whole of it. And it's difficult in a way that's out of all proportion to how simple it sounds. Because by year 3, the sentence feels ridiculous. You feel like a man complaining about weather from 3 years ago. Say it anyway. Ring your son and say, I know it's been 3 years and I'm still finding it hard. That's all. Don't explain it and don't apologize for it. I did it eventually, not well and later than I should have. I said something to David on a Sunday about the 3rd spring that amounted to that, and he was quiet a moment and then he said, Pop, I didn't know I was allowed to still bring her up. 3 years. Both of us had been managing the other one. He'd stopped mentioning his mother because he thought it would hurt me, and I'd stopped mentioning her because I thought I was supposed to be past it. And the two of us had, between us, built a perfect silence around the person we both missed most in the world. That conversation was the turn. Not a solution, there isn't one, but the turn. We talk about her now. He tells me things about her I didn't know. Last spring he told me something she'd said to him when he was 19 that I'd never heard. And I wrote it down in the notebook that night, and it's one of the 60. And I'll say the last thing, which is the reason I've told you all of this. The 4th year was better, considerably, and the 5th was better than the 4th, and I'd not swap where I am now for any year since she died. But the 3rd year is where that got built, and nobody told me that either. Here's the shape of it, as best I understand it looking back. Year 1, you're a patient. Things are done to you and for you, and your only job is to still be there at the end of it. That's not a criticism. That's what year 1 is, and it's correct. Year 3, you're not a patient anymore. Nobody's treating you. And the mistake, the one I made for most of that year, is to keep behaving like a patient, to wait, to assume that time is a treatment, and that if you sit still long enough, you'll come out the other side of this, the way you came out the other side of the first Christmas. Time isn't a treatment. Time got me through the 1st year, and then it stopped working. And I sat waiting for it to start working again for the better part of 12 months. The 3rd year is when you stop being a patient and become a builder. That's the whole of it. And nobody hands you the tools and nobody tells you the work has started. And so a great many people sit in a chair waiting for a recovery that is not coming. Because it isn't a recovery, it's a construction, and it will not happen unless you get up and do it. Everything I have now got built after that realization. The mornings, the shop by 9, the people I speak to every week, and the reaching out I do first. The way this house feels. None of it arrived. All of it was made by an old man in his late 70s who finally understood that no more help was coming and that this was now his job. So if you're in the 3rd year and you're wondering why it's harder than the 1st when it's supposed to be getting easier, it isn't broken and neither are you. The scaffolding came down. That's all that happened. The scaffolding came down and the building isn't finished. And now you're the one who has to finish it. That's a hard thing to be told at 79 or at whatever age you're hearing it. It's also the best news I've got, because a thing you have to build is a thing you can build. And I did. And it took about 2 years and it worked. I'd give you the first 3 boards if you want them, because I know how useless it is to be told to build something without being told where to start. The first is that you put something in the morning. Anything. Mine is 45 minutes at that kitchen table with the coffee and no radio, watching it get light on the cedars. It sounds like nothing, It is the single most important piece of my day, and I've talked about it elsewhere at length. A day without a beginning does not start, it merely occurs. And a run of days that merely occur is what the third year is made of. The second is that you get something in progress, not a hobby, something unfinished that will still be unfinished tomorrow. Mine is whatever's on the bench in that shop. Right now, a chest of drawers for Susan that she doesn't know about, and there's a third drawer to fit in the morning. And that fact is doing a considerable amount of work in my life at this moment. A man with something unfinished has a reason for tomorrow to arrive. That's not a small thing. That's most of it. And the third is that you do something for one other person every week. One. It needn't be large. There's a woman of 91 down this road named Dot, and she gets soup on a Sunday and an hour of my company. And she has no idea that she's doing at least as much for me as I'm doing for her. Because here's what I worked out in the fourth year, and it's the thing I'd most want to leave anybody with tonight. The worst part of the third year was not the loneliness. It was being unnecessary. Those are different, and I had them confused for a long while. Lonely is wanting company. Unnecessary is the sense that if you didn't get up tomorrow, nothing anywhere would need adjusting. And of the two, the second one is far more dangerous, because you can be surrounded by people and still be entirely unnecessary, and a man in that condition will go under with his phone ringing. Loneliness is cured by company. Unnecessariness is only cured by being needed. And the only way to be needed is to make yourself useful to somebody, and nobody will assign you that job at 79. You have to go and take it. Soup on a Sunday, a cutting board for a neighbor, a letter to a granddaughter that takes you an afternoon. That's the whole of it. It looks like charity from outside, and from inside it's nothing of the kind. It's a man giving himself a reason to be here on Sunday. Once I understood that, the third year ended. Not on a date, there wasn't a morning where it lifted, but that's what ended it, and I can point at the thing that did it, which is more than I can say for how it started. So that's the 5. And if you're in the third, tell somebody it's still hard. That's the one instruction in this whole talk, and it's the one I put off for a year. Now, if you're in the third year and you're looking around at a house that's gone quiet, one you can't seem to be comfortable in anymore, with a wardrobe in it you haven't opened, that's the exact place I was. And I made another talk about what I did about it. The 4 things that turned this from a building I lived in back into a home, including the wardrobe and how long it took me, and what my daughter did on the weekend we finally opened it. That's the builder's talk. If tonight's found you where I think it might have, that's the one to go to next. It's right there on the screen. Go on over whenever you're ready. The fire's still going here, and the kettle's still warm. I'll see you there.